questions? The two variable one is a little bit trickier because, and you know, if you look at the spreadsheet as I showed it to you, this formula is wrong, which is why it's got all these goofy things. The two variable one is a little bit trickier. You do exactly the same thing. You use that data analysis, regression. You want the same Y range, but here you're going to start, if you have two, you're going to capture it this way. You're going to get those two columns, okay? And what you're going to see here is the first one, D4. And what you're going to see here is the last one, which is that one. It's an array. It's what Excel calls an array. It's what everybody calls an array. And I'm going to leave the rest the same, but now you can't hit enter, because anything in Excel where you would hit enter if it was just a column, if it's an array, you have to hit Control Shift Enter to make it work. And now it produced two variables. It's got an intercept and it's got two variables. Excel also doesn't tell you which one of these variables is which, so you've got to be pretty careful. But the one closest to the intercept is the one that's closest to the explanatory variable. If you're not sure, just put a bunch of zeros in the one and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. And this one, the R-squared went up a little bit. Okay. So that's the difference between doing a one variable. And if you had 5 variables that you were using to explain, you would just start there and down there, hit Control Shift Enter, and it would give you 5 x's. You'll notice here that the t-stat is sort of crummy. The fact that it's a minus isn't what bothers me, because it's got a minus here. The fact that it's less than 2 is what bothers me. So in this case, I'm going to go back and do it one last time. Nothing's going to change here, except I'm going to click that little constant is 0 and hit Control Shift Enter and say OK. And now when it produces the results, the intercept is 0. Okay. And if you had looked at this really closely, you would have seen it got a little bit better. So that's how you do those things. Now, let me show you one other tricky thing. There used to be a company called Data Resources, and Data Resources was started by, amongst other people, a Nobel Prize winner. And the reason it was started was really to provide data. Eventually they got into producing incredibly good forecasts. The person who was the Nobel Prize winner was a man by the name of Otto Eckstein. He was an economics professor at Harvard. And there were 3 different companies that produced good forecasts, private forecasts of the U.S. economy. But DRI, Data Resources, was head and shoulders above the other 2, although the other ones would argue that. But if you actually tried to run their models, you never got the results that they published. And the reason you didn't get the results is before they would publish the models, they would fudge the forecasts. And they never called them fudge factors, they called them add factors. Because what happens is frequently when you do a forecast, you get a result that doesn't make sense. The computer just tells you what it wants to do. And there might be good reasons to believe it's told you something that doesn't make sense. So you add factor it. And add factoring is frankly an art. And when Dr. Eckstein died, the forecasts were never as good as when he was alive, because he really understood how economies worked. But if you look at what's in this cell, this is a formula, right? And it's the formula that I created using the regression results. But then I added 5,500 to it. That's a fudge factor. Why did I add 5,500 to it? Because without it, even though the economy was getting better, because of the way these numbers, the pattern of these numbers work, Home Depot's revenues this year were going down rather sharply. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. Now, in the real world, I would have called up management and had a long discussion with management about what they thought the numbers were going to be this year and why and all that sort of stuff. I can't do that anymore. If I call them up, not even the secretary speaks to me. Okay? But you can find analyst estimates in all sorts of places. So I just went, in this case, just to one place. I went to Yahoo and sort of saw what the average analyst was saying the revenues were going to be this year. And I added that number to get it more or less up there.
There's no more singular underwording experience.
So don't be embarrassed about doing that. If you come up with a number and you look at it and you say, geez, everything else looks good, but I have this discontinuity between the real numbers and my forecast, and I've got to make sure, you know, numbers typically don't go like this and then start here again. Numbers typically move a little bit. And when you see something like that, it might just be something that the computer did. The computer isn't smart. It's just doing what it's been programmed to do. So you can be intelligent about that. Questions?
Professor, can you briefly summarize the task for next
Okay,
week?
the task for next week is to, and I'll give you a copy of this file. The problem for next week is to get that for Coles and Target. And when you get this file, you'll see that there are sheets past the file, past that particular sheet. Ignore them. We'll talk about those next week. You'll see there are all sorts of sheets past that sheet, but I want you to get to that sheet, okay? Another way of saying it is, if you go here, we're taking the extra step in calculating that, but we're really doing this part, okay, of this two-block thing. I want you to do this part. Did any of you ever do biology experiments or physics experiments in high school or anything like that? Because, you know, these things are supposed to be sort of cut and dry. And when you actually try to do them, you realize the world isn't quite as cut and dried as it is. And you do have, there's a lot of judgment that goes on, even with good experiments. And the trouble with doing this kind of work is that when you do a physics experiment, I can reproduce that experiment 1,000 times, and I'll get variation, but I'll always be reproducing the same experiment. And if I do it enough times, I'm really confident in the results. The problem with this kind of stuff is I only get to run the experiment once. And you sort of think, oh, I can use the computer to get me a lot of different results. No. I've only done it once. I've done it once based on whatever history I have and whatever judgment I used to get the computer to give me results. But I can never do it twice because tomorrow is different from today. So this is a lot trickier. But I was hoping some of you, do you know the experiment that is the basis of all of genetics, where an Austrian monk actually planted all these different varieties of peas and tried to figure out if he took the flower from this one and fertilized it with this one, what happened to the color and the shape of the peas? And all of modern genetics dates back to the work that he did. And when you see his results written up, they're absolutely perfect because there are certain ratios that come out mathematically, and his results come out exactly that way. Because he threw out all the experiments where it sort of drove things away from the results. But actually, he exercised good judgment. So is it clear what the next step in this process is? Does somebody have a thumb drive?
Yeah.
So just to be clear, you want us to forecast the revenues, and then the net income for the next.
The first thing you're going to have to ask is, how am I going
can
to
you put your
forecast the
phone
revenues?
numbers?
You're going to have to
As well as you,
find
can you put your phone
some
number?
data. We've got pictures on here. You're going to have to find some data. You know, it might be that a trend works fine, but you're going to have to think about it. And you're going to have to then forecast the revenues. You're going to have to look at your common size statement to try to figure out, you know, how you go from those revenues
Put your
to
phone number.
to profits. And this is just called fair value calculation.
No, I already have everyone else's. Victor, I have yours. Thank you.
Either this file is super big or something funny is going on here. It's trying to import pictures that are on your file. Okay. Close that.
Mhm.
Close that. Now let's try.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions? You're beginning to understand what's cooking here? It's good?